great pleasure for me to introduce the person who's going to lead the next session, who we've just had the good fortune to meet in person over the past number of days. It's Mr. Reza Jafari. Reza was one of the original inspirations of the event in the UN with Bob Bollinger, and he's been very gracious with his time, his energy, and his extremely deep knowledge of the whole ecosystem. He has very many years of experience, obviously as a member of the Broadband Commission, in which he sits with Denis O'Brien, with whom we'll speak shortly. And in previous other roles he's held throughout public and private companies across the US, and also in terms of his inspiration in the development of educational and technology solutions for those at the bottom of the pyramid. He is a true disruptor. He's really inspirational in terms of his understanding, and I'm very delighted to welcome him on your behalf. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tom, for your very kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's my great pleasure to be here in Dublin, the center of many activities and initiatives that Tom and the Minister spoke about. And a great pleasure for me to be here again in Dublin. I always love to be in Dublin. For me, Dublin, with a significant past and the very, very promising future, is the crossroad of everything that is happening in our industry, in particular information communication technology. As Bob Bollinger and Tom mentioned, and the Minister very clearly shared with you, we are in the midst of a major transformation of education and training of the healthcare workers on a global basis. The success of this transformation depends upon whether we can create an ecosystem that Dr. Bollinger talked about again. That ecosystem is going to involve many stakeholders from all walks of life. But we have to make sure that this ecosystem creates incentives for all participants, for all stakeholders, and also creates a sustainable business model that is going to create this environment that transformation can happen and be sustainable. One of those individuals who has been a very, very key player in creation of the ecosystem, not only being a player of the ecosystem, even creating his own ecosystem, is here with us today. He does not need any introduction. While everybody in our industry, especially at the CEO level, tries to make a headline, he's trying to make a difference in everybody's life, not only in Ireland, not only in Dublin, but all over the world. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you Denis O'Brien, who doesn't need any introduction, to join us for a conversation.
Morning, everybody.
Denis, great to have you here, and I know again how busy you are. Denis just came back from China. For those of you who are doing business in China or are Chinese origins or people who are involved with the China's business, they know it's a very, very complex environment. I'm going to get to that question later on to ask Denis, because I know he's doing quite a bit. GETHealth, one of the most successful companies in the world. You've been at the helm of this company, and you've been a very, very influential leader in our industry. Tell us a little bit about what GETHealth is doing, and then I'm going to ask you tell us about the rest of the portfolio of ecosystem that you built.
Well, we started our business in 2001, and we went into Jamaica, and at the time, Jamaica had very high prices. It was about $2 a minute for long distance and about 70 or 80 cents to make a call. So the very wealthy people in Jamaica had a mobile phone. And we, over a period of a couple of years, changed that. And now in Jamaica, a country of about 2.7 million people, there's 110% mobile penetration. We've just launched an LTE network. So we're building, you know, better networks than you'd experience in the United States in countries, you know, that would be seen as countries that are emerging. And the same in Papua New Guinea, on the other side of the world, a country of about 7 or 8 million people, again, bringing, you know, the most modern technologies to those countries. So, you know, broadband, I think, is a human right. And I'm hoping that in the MDGs next year, that actually it will be actually put into words as such, because if you really want to have economic development and move globalization to the underdeveloped world, you know, you have to have umbilical cords going into these countries and the most modern technologies.
Well, the minister mentioned about the role of information technology and mobile. You're in the middle of it. I spoke about the ecosystem, but you've already built an ecosystem. You have now owned a healthcare organization and a hospital in Dublin. You own a broadcasting organization. You're involved in the training and education of human resources in China, one of the largest companies, your Monster.com, and also activities that is going on in here. How would you feel that the ecosystem is going to make a significant contribution to the transformation of the healthcare training and education as we move on?
You know, the minister touched on this morning. It's already happening in Ireland in a very serious way. And we're fortunate in Ireland that we, you know, adopt technology very quickly. A bit like the emerging world, but, you know, if you want to have widespread technology leaps, you obviously need networks. And the biggest challenge now is, in the world today, there are about 2.5 billion people with access to broadband, but those people are living in very developed countries. The challenge is in parts of Asia and also Africa, where, you know, broadband access is probably less than 10%. It's, you know, over the next 5 years to see how that develops. So the plans that you're talking about over the next 48 hours are heavily dependent on networks. And we have this situation where telephone companies or mobile companies are investing very heavily, but they just do not, you know, if you're putting 25% of your revenues in terms of capital expenditure every year, your investors, you know, are beating a drum and saying, no, we want a dividend and we want, you know, you to be more conservative. So there's this situation where on our own, you know, mobile phone operators in Africa or Asia will not be able to do it. And there needs to be a contribution from what's known as these OTT operators. So people like Facebook, Google, WhatsApp, all of these people who ride on top of the networks but don't do any revenue with the telcos. And I suppose the most disappointing thing this week was this whole question of net neutrality, where President Obama has put his 2 feet in it again. I mean, when President Obama, you know, like everybody, I was widely enthusiastic, as most people in Ireland are Democrats. But, you know, he's just got this issue wrong, because net neutrality is great if you're in the United States, but awful if you're in Africa. Because effectively, it means that these Silicon Valley can ride across the networks and not give any contribution to the construction of the networks. And that is actually going to hold back the development of e-health. It's a massive challenge. And if you take Google, Google would probably have 200 people in Brussels, lobbyists, you know, rattling the cage of the European Commissioner in this area. So there's challenges everywhere. The FCC got 4 or 5 million hits to their website about the net neutrality issue. So unfortunately, normally America leads in a lot of these advances, but because of the lobbying power of Silicon Valley and these companies who have been major contributors in the most recent elections of 10 days ago and the presidential elections, they are actually ruling the roost.
Well, Denis, you put your hand on a very, very hot topic that is very, very near and dear to my heart, as you know. I believe the ecosystem that we all believe in, it has to have a sustainable business model. You cannot build the infrastructure at your own expense and let the other folks to come and have party in your house without paying you a penny or a euro.
I think there's a balance.
How can you make it a balance?
There's a balancing act, I think, because it's a matter of regulators in the African countries saying, look, you know, we really want to have everybody in the country access to broadband. And once you have broadband, then you can have all the other e-health services. But there has to be a contribution of some, even if it's modest, from Google and all these people, because, you know, Google's profit margins are 80%. Mobile phone operators traditionally have had sort of margins of 40, but they're going towards 25. So there has to be some contribution. And then if you look at technology, there is also the the work that has been done in low orbit satellites, where, if you take if you take Burkina Faso, for example, it's unrealistic to say that, 90% of the geographic size of that country is ever going to be covered by, LTE or 4G. So using access to low orbit satellites also could be a very economic way for health workers to actually upload and download data. And I actually think, if you look in Africa, there's 1 million new health workers needed.
Yes.
And Jeffrey Sachs has a really interesting project. And, there'll be people who'll say, well, I don't agree with his project, but I'm always a believer, if somebody is out there trying to do something, out of that fallout, there'll be a way or a system that will develop that will make another leap forward as such.
Well, when Jeffrey Sachs came to us, to our UN Broadband Commission, and asked for help, nobody offered help. 12 months passes by, he comes and says, I need your help. The only person on the UN Broadband Commission who held his hand up and said, I will help you, was Denis O'Brien. And I was the second guy behind him and says, we would like to help you, Jeffrey, to be able to do it. How that process is going, and what would you say in terms of creating a public-private partnership? It is not only the private sector to making the investment, even for the OTTs come and use it, because they're all going to be participants in our ecosystem. We just need to create that win-win opportunity for all of us.
Yeah, well, you see, I think, he's a big thinker.
Yes.
He's a big brain, and he has some fairly wild ideas. But, as a social entrepreneur, he's worth backing. The problem is that, a lot of people on the Broadband Commission would be representing very big companies, and they can't make a decision in terms of doing something. So it's easier if you don't have shareholders, much easier. So if you take his plan, he's looking for startup cap, which he's got now, and now he's trying to obviously implement. We said that we would do it with him in Haiti. And it's my belief that in a project like that, and particularly in e-health in very, very poor, underdeveloped countries, I think the operators should actually give the capacity for free. Because when you look at the totality of the capacity on the networks that's needed by a health worker, it's very, very modest. It could be 10 gigabits a month. So it is not really, it's not an expensive thing to do. And also, it's not a cash payment by the operators, so it's not going to affect their margins. They have the capacity, it's perishable. It's like an airline seat that goes empty from New York to Dublin.
And talking about Haiti, you did a fantastic job. You personally and GETHealth, after the earthquake, you really revitalized the entire region for what you did.
There was more than us. There was...
Tell us about what happened, and are you satisfied with the progress?
I think Haiti has made great progress. Tragically, the earthquake has moved the country on as such in a big leap. And I think the work that people have done there over many years, people like Concern Worldwide, who have been in Haiti for 18 years, the Mercy Corps, all these different organizations who've been embedded in Haiti, Partners in Health, for example, have done incredible work, because the most important thing in a country like Haiti is working through the government, which can be very frustrating. The worst NGOs in the world are the ones who go around the government. And they are just drive NGOs in my mind. So there is a core group of NGOs that are transforming Haiti. So Haiti has a functioning health service now. The biggest issue they have really at the moment is obviously job creation, because about 35% of people don't have a job. And unfortunately, Haiti, the capital of Haiti, which was the seat of the government, Port-au-Prince, was the first capital city in 100 years to be hit by an earthquake. So when you have all of those things coming together, Haiti is growing at about 4 or 5%. It's heavily dependent on Venezuela, believe it or not, because the Venezuelans give them free oil, which they sell, and half it goes into a loan. But the government runs the whole government for about $1.5 billion a year, and that's 10 million people. So the challenges are for Haiti is that they have a very good trade agreement with the US, is how do you get manufacturing jobs, just-in-time manufacturing jobs into Haiti, because as a workforce, You know, we indirectly employ about 35,000 people. They are smart, you know, they're on the ball, they want to learn. If we on our intranet say there's a course in anything, everybody signs up to it immediately. So there's a great willingness to learn, improve. And if one person has a job, exactly the same in Africa, they're probably looking after 10 or 15 family members. And I think also politically, I'll finish on this one, because I get excited talking about Haiti, is for the first time they have a really good government.
Yes.
They have a president and a prime minister who are not corrupt, and they are moving the country forward in leaps and bounds.
Okay, this is a great kind of a transition now to Africa, because you started from Africa. I wanted to make sure that, again, we talked about some of the things that you have done in Haiti and your perspective in particular. Can we learn the lessons, take the lessons that we learned in Haiti, take it to other parts of the world, especially in Africa, the things that we should do, the things that we shouldn't do to be able to create this public-private partnership that you talked about? What is the role of the government? What do they need to do to incentivize you as a private sector to make more investment and sometimes even give the service for free to be able to move them to the next level of progress?
You know, I think there's this notion in governments everywhere around the world where selling spectrum and selling new licenses for a vast amount of money is a really clever thing. And people say, well, you're in the business and you'd say that that's a bad thing, but I actually think it's a crazy thing to do. So if you take, buying a license, if they have an auction in Nigeria for $1 billion, that money actually will be taken by the operator out of their resources and not put into network. And it's a very flawed way of thinking. Spectrum fees, anything where there's an obstacle to rolling out new advanced broadband networks, all of that needs to just disappear. Even in Ireland, and we probably had to do this a couple of years ago, we sold licenses for 300 million. In a developed country, there's arguments both ways, but if you take an underdeveloped country in Africa like Malawi or Chad or some of these countries, I don't think there should be any charge. But the only thing that they should do is contractually, with a letter of credit, make sure that the operators keep their promises in rolling out the network. And if they don't, you draw the letter of credit. So it's more of an incentive to roll out the network, which obviously has a massive impact in the whole area of mHealth.
Yes. Well, you and I have a good, very close friendship with President Kagame of Rwanda, and he has created this public-private partnership with the Korean Telecom. Do you think that model can be replicated by organizations like yours and others in other parts of Africa?
I think it's about taking the best of what's going on in the world and showing countries, how it works, okay? Rwanda is a country that, over the last 10, 12 years has made a massive leap forward, okay? And, we have even been advocating with the Haitian government to say, well, here's what they're doing in Rwanda. You may consider the same, doing the same. But, I think when you got best practice, it should be taken up by everybody and run with it. Just because it's somebody else's idea, any innovation should be welcomed.
Yes. Well, you're one of the prominent and pioneers of collaborative innovation. And the minister talked about the innovation that is happening in Ireland, in Dublin. Again, you're in the middle of it. You're involved in terms of investment and leading it. What are the things we need to do for this audience and for the people who are watching us through the streaming on the webcast that we need to do to work together from academia and the community health workers to be able to move this process forward, transform the education and training of the workforce for the healthcare industry, because as you know, there's quite a bit of shortage in there?
I think it has to start with a number of things. Obviously, the new Millennium Development Goals are going to be the objective and the goal. And then it's how you trickle down action out of those goals is the big thing. And, if you take Africa as a place to invest today, there's a mad rush for Africa. People 10 years ago were heading to Brazil. Africa is seen as a very attractive proposition now. So if you take mobile phone networks, a lot of them in countries there may be 6 or 7 networks. That is, everybody's investing a limited amount of money. There should be some mergers to do that. where realistically a country the size of Malawi should only have 3 networks, because then they'll all have enough money to reinvest. And it's about encouraging people to reinvest money, but also to come and work with partnerships with the NGOs and the public health providers in those countries on a partnership, because it's not about making money, it's actually about achieving an objective to lower infant mortality rates, to eradicate disease. And I think there is a kind of a nascent emerging kind of movement to do that. You know, in visiting Africa, you just see fantastic projects on the ground. And, you know, the NGOs that I like are the ones who can implement. You know what I mean? I think donors today are much more, you know, critical and much more aware of what are the deliveries. You know, so, you know, there was an organization here in Ireland called Right to Sight that had started an organization in Africa in ophthalmology, which was a very low-cost way of treating glaucoma, cataracts. And, you know, you do not have to be a massive NGO to make a difference, but I think more and more it's connecting donors together. I mean, there are massive donors like with Bill Gates, but then there are smaller donors who are also working with companies, organizations that are making very impactful solutions.
Well, you're one of those on the top of my list again, as I said at the outset. You're not trying to make a headline, you're trying to make a difference. Now, a few years ago, you decided China is an opportunity for you. You like to somehow explore that opportunity and create an engine that is going to help and create jobs and bring the workforce and make it available again to organizations that they need it. Can you share with us to see what's happening up there and whether that model can be replicated other parts?
Well, in China, there's a big move from the country into the cities, and there's a big skill shortage as well. So we're in the business of, we have a website business called China HR, where we post jobs, we do headhunting, we do training, we help Chinese companies employ people overseas. For example, China now is developing a civil airline or manufacturing business. We've hired engineers to go into China from Airbus and Boeing and other companies, British Aerospace, to go into China as such. So we've about 3,000 people in China working, but it's a kind of completely different situation to what we face in Papua New Guinea, or Jamaica or Haiti or any other country, or El Salvador. So, you know, it's in some ways China is an easier place to do business than some of those countries, because we're in 32 countries. We actually have a full-time Secretary of State who all he does is visits governments, because, you know, policies are changing all the time, and we're trying to get the governments to really look at taxation to make it more beneficial to investment. And a lot of the countries, like in Haiti today, about $35 million is collected for free education, because when President Martelly came in 4 years ago, he promised free education for everybody, but there was no money in the exchequer. So we worked with the government to create a tax for calls coming into the country. So we said, yeah, we will collect a tax, provided everybody does that. But then now you have Viber and some of the other companies who go around that, because they're sending over VoIP, so they don't contribute anything to Haiti. So we're trying to make sure that the government realize that they're losing out 20 million a year by not collecting tax from somebody else, and that goes a long way in Haiti in terms of funding education, because you know, uniquely in Haiti, it's all private education. Families scrape together $1 or $2 a month to pay for their child to go and get educated in very, very modest schools. 80% of teachers have only been educated to second grade in the US system. So we're retraining, we have a training program for teachers, and on Tuesday we will have constructed our 150th school. So we have about 65,000 children going to schools that we built, and where we have a constant program of training teachers as well, using technology. So both in a classroom environment at the weekend, but also using technology as well. So there's lots of ways, there's a lot of very innovative solutions. You know, Partners in Health, Concern, you know, a lot of these organizations are doing phenomenal stuff. Everybody thinks, oh, you got to go to the US or Europe to see real, you know, cutting edge or new ideas. But, you know, in the developing world, it's happening. Because you know, when you have no funding, it brings innovation.
And everything is in greenfield. Again, as Denis shared with us, there are a lot of lessons learned from different parts of the world, but every environment, every country, every organization, every government has a model that fits their own requirements, their own limitations, their own resources. So what we are sharing today is that there are a lot of opportunities, but there are a lot of models that can be learned. You don't have to start everything from scratch. The good news is everything is almost greenfield in places that you wanted to go.
I think you've got to work with governments, though.
Absolutely.
You've got to build capacity, and you know that takes time, patience, and you know for the last 5 years we've been trying to work with the government to bring in a national program using, you know, internet-based training for teachers. And to, you know, the startup cost was like $14 million. But nothing works unless a government contributes as well. You know, it would be easy for the private sector to put the $14 million as a start to retrain all the teachers in Haiti. But unless you're working with the government, it doesn't work.
Absolutely.
And, you know, in the days after the earthquake, actually, you know, Tom is here from Concern, or was the chief executive of Concern, but Arnold, and everybody descended on Haiti. You know, every NGO, because they thought this was an opportunity to raise money from whatever country they came from and to build their profile. But they were going in and, you know, buying every car, renting expensive apartments, whereas the NGOs that were there for 15, 20 years were the ones who really did the work. You know, and you know, I saw one NGO run by one person, landed in the country, was only there an hour, and was giving out yards about the lack of coordination. You know, and I'm saying to myself, how? You know, this is just publicity seeking. So, you know, I think the really serious people in the world today, in health, are going to be the long-term players that are going to make the absolute difference.
Well, again, the involvement of the government, again, goes back to the public-private partnership. They need to put something on the table. They need to incent us, the private sector. They need to incent the NGOs. They need to incent even academia to release the resources and make the resources available for the changes and transformation that they expect to happen within their own country. But the other side of it is us. What are we looking for, governments, besides just them making a commitment and even making an investment? What are the one or two other things that we look for to go in the countries and help them?
I don't think you're going to get matching funds, you know, from a government, the government of Malawi, for example. You know, we were involved in building a maternity hospital there, and the government didn't have any money. But on the other hand, we worked through the government to make sure they were happy with the hospital, that the standards and everything was within their policy, and, you know, where the hospital was built, you know, every facet of the program was with them all the way, even though they didn't have money. Yeah. And I think
they give you incentives potentially? Or?
No, they didn't give any incentives at all. It was an Irish project by the Rose Foundation, by a woman here in Dublin, and she put it together, but she worked with the Department of Health. Okay. That was the key. Yes. And more, that has to be the model. Like Partners in Health now have the biggest teaching hospital now in Haiti. It's you know, locked hand to hand with the Ministry of Health in Haiti. No money came from the Ministry of Health. I think also that if you want to have, you know, economic development is more it's like the front load, and then services come, because a country like Haiti doesn't have a central budget the way Ireland would or the United States would. And when, you know, unless you have economic development, you will never be able to provide the social services and you will be always on a drip from USAID or AusAid or whoever it is, or the European Union. And the problem with a country like Haiti is that this thing about corruption You know, people talk about corruption in Haiti and that. You know, there'd be somebody looking for $10 to do something. But, you know, within government, any of the major projects have been corruption-free as such. So, you know, I think USAID, the World Bank, you know, all these organizations take too much time. So if you're an entrepreneur and you want to raise $50,000 and you go to the IADB, you know, one of their funds in Port-au-Prince, it takes a year to get the money. And you're dying on the vine in the meantime. So in some ways, economic development, public health development are nearly aligned.
Absolutely. Well, Denis, has been a great opportunity to speak with you and to share your thoughts. Any final words you have for our group back in here before we wrap this up? Because I believe, again, every one of them, instead of me summarizing, they're going to have their own takeaways and they're going to tweet and put it on the Facebook.
I was reading the profiles of all the different organizations who are represented here. And, you know, I think it's the power of the 200 people in this room, not the power of the individual organization, which will make the difference. And I think sometimes people can be a bit territorial. Like in business, we're always territorial. But in the not-for-profit sector, there's also people being territorial. I think the more partnerships that can be created over the next number of days here and on, the better with your organization. And I'm sorry about the monsoon that you had this morning. It's normally dry, sunny, and very warm here. So thank you very much, Reza.
Thank you. On behalf of our audience, I'd like to thank Denis O'Brien. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Great to see you again. We'll be talking soon. Yeah, great to see you, mate. Thank you.